Chapter 1: The Ice Screams. The wind, a serrated knife of glacial air, clawed at the observation dome. It howled not like a natural force, but a chorus of tormented souls trapped beneath the ice, a sound I would soon learn to recognize as the prelude to waking hell. The clock in the corner of my cramped quarters ticked backward, a subtle, unnerving countdown against the relentless white noise of the storm. 23:59:58. 23:59:57. It was a glitch, of course. A simple malfunction in the antiquated Soviet technology that held this forsaken research station together. That's what I told myself. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, and I am, or rather was, a glaciologist. Obsessed might be a more accurate term. Obsessed with the secrets buried deep within the polar ice, the silent, frozen history of our planet. That obsession, fueled by a desperate need to escape the shadow of my father's legacy, a man whose life was swallowed by the unforgiving Arctic, had led me to Outpost 31, a desolate, geographically isolated research facility clinging precariously to the edge of the Antarctic continent. It was located 200 miles away from Russia's Vostok station and 600 miles away from the geographic South Pole. Geographical isolation at its finest. The instructions given to me were extremely clear. 1. Do not leave the station under any circumstances unless approved by Central Command. 2. Document, in excruciating detail, every single observation, no matter how small or irrelevant. 3. Follow protocol to the letter. The protocols were simple: record atmospheric temperature every 2 hours, record ice density every 4 hours, and record ice formations every 6 hours. 4. Trust no one. The isolation was profound, a crushing weight on the mind. My only companions were 3 other scientists: Dr. Lena Petrova, a brooding Russian climatologist haunted by a past she refused to discuss; Ben Carter, an American geologist, addicted to painkillers since a climbing accident left him with chronic back pain; and Jian Li, a quiet, observant Chinese engineer, whose expertise kept our failing technology from complete collapse. Lena, Ben, and Jian all were obsessed with different things. Lena was obsessed with proving global warming wasn't real and the data was being misread. Ben was obsessed with making the pain go away, and Jian was obsessed with not dying in this forsaken place, or so it seemed. Outpost 31 was a monument to forgotten ambition and Soviet-era paranoia. The architecture itself was unsettling: corridors that twisted and turned without apparent logic, rooms with no doors leading to solid walls, floors that tilted subtly, throwing off your equilibrium. The air inside was thick with the metallic tang of aging machinery and the faint, sickly sweet smell of rot, a smell that seemed to be emanating from the deepest, unexplored sections of the station. The station's history, pieced together from fragmented logs and whispered rumors, spoke of dark experiments, of a relentless pursuit of something hidden beneath the ice, a pursuit that ended in madness and violence. A massacre, some whispered, a complete and utter breakdown of order that left the station abandoned for decades. The last expedition that entered this station had a total of 15 scientists. None of them were ever found alive. Central Command believes it was a group murder-suicide due to the harsh conditions. No one in Central Command wanted to talk about the incident. They only repeated one single phrase: follow protocol to the letter. My obsession with uncovering the truth about what happened in the station led me to go through the station's archives to read what really happened. I read every single documentation I could find, from the most irrelevant ones to the most hidden ones. After weeks of going through thousands of documents, I realized all of them, without exception, repeated a single code phrase: the ice screams. The technology within the station was a bizarre mix of cutting-edge and hopelessly outdated. Glitching screens displayed distorted images of the outside world, the wind sounding like a desperate whisper. The communication system crackled with static, occasionally spitting out garbled fragments of voices that sounded wrong. The technology seemed to feed the eeriness. Outside, the Antarctic landscape was a study in stark, unforgiving beauty. Vast, white plains stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional jagged peak of a buried mountain range. But even this beauty was tainted. Strange, geometric formations appeared on the ice, patterns that defied natural explanation, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. Every single time the storm gets stronger, the forms get bigger, I noticed after weeks of tracking the weather and the formations. It was as if something was trying to emerge. The weather itself seemed to be responding to something beyond our comprehension. The storms intensified with a chilling precision, mirroring a growing sense of dread within the station. When I felt a growing sense of dread, the weather was almost at the breaking point. It was like the antagonist's mood affected the weather outside. The generator sputtered, plunging the station into intermittent darkness. Emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. The dripping water, a constant, maddening percussion, seemed to amplify in the silence. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the station, every gust of wind sent shivers down my spine. The silence between the gusts were the worst. The silence sounded like someone screaming but being muted at the same time. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock ticking backward, and wondering what secrets were buried beneath the ice, secrets that were now undeniably waking up. The next day I mentioned to Lena what I was thinking about the scream of the ice. I approached her in the cafeteria and asked her, "Have you ever heard the ice scream?" Lena didn't respond. She looked at me with a face that I still remember in my nightmares. Her face was devoid of emotion. She then looked me directly to the eyes and said, "Follow protocol to the letter." After she said that, she left the cafeteria. Ben's addiction was getting worse. He couldn't seem to stop taking the pills. I found him unconscious in his room with a bottle of empty pills beside him. After that incident, I started hearing Ben mumbling to himself in the hallways. Most of the time I can't understand what he's saying, but sometimes I can hear some phrases that were extremely disturbing, like, "It wants me to set them free," or "I can feel them under my skin." Giant seemed to be the only one that was relatively normal. He always seemed to be working, fixing, and optimizing the station. I suspected he was afraid to go to sleep and have nightmares just like me. That night I decided to do something extremely stupid. I had to uncover what was below the ice that was screaming. I started to put on my snowsuit to leave the station. I knew that I was breaking protocol, but I didn't care. Something was calling me from outside. When I was just about to open the door, Lena appeared behind me. I turned around to see her. She looked at me directly in the eyes and said, "If you leave, we are all doomed." "Then tell me, Lena, what the hell is going on? Tell me about the screams," I said. Lena didn't respond. She only stared at me. The dripping water was getting louder and the clock was ticking backward faster and faster. I knew that if I didn't leave right now, I may never know the truth about the ice screams. I pushed Lena to the side and opened the door. Chapter 2: The White Hell. The moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a physical blow. It was a cold that transcended mere temperature. It was a cold that seeped into your bones, into your soul, a cold that whispered of ancient, malevolent things. The wind screamed in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. Visibility was near zero. The world was a swirling vortex of white. The landscape was different than I remembered. The familiar, relatively flat expanse of ice near the station was now a chaotic jumble of jagged ridges and deep crevasses. It was as if the ice itself had been contorted by some immense, unseen force. The geometric formations, the patterns I had observed from the dome, were now larger, more complex, etched into the ice with an unnerving precision. They resembled sigils, ritualistic symbols of some kind. The storm intensified, whipping snow into a blinding frenzy. The wind seemed to possess a malevolent intelligence, pushing me back towards the station, urging me to turn back. But the call of the ice, the promise of answers, was too strong to resist. I activated my GPS tracker, and set a course for the location where I had observed the most prominent sigil formation, about 5 kilometers from the station. Each step was a battle against the elements, a struggle to maintain my footing on the treacherous ice. As I moved away from the station, I noticed something strange about the light. It wasn't the soft, diffuse light of a normal blizzard. It was a harsh, almost unnatural glare that seemed to emanate from the ice itself. The sigils glowed faintly, pulsating with an eerie, internal light. The further I walked, the stronger the smell of rot became. It was no longer a faint odor. It was a nauseating stench that filled my nostrils, a smell of decay and corruption that seemed to cling to the air itself. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the location indicated by my GPS, but there was nothing there, only a vast expanse of white, broken by a single, impossibly deep crevasse. The crevasse wasn't there before, I'm sure of it. I've been tracking this area for months. The sigil formation was gone, swallowed by the crevasse. The wind howled louder than ever, as if mocking my efforts. Disappointment washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I peered into the crevasse, but the darkness was absolute. It was a darkness that seemed to absorb all light, a darkness that felt alive. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths, a sound that resonated deep within my chest, a sound that spoke of ancient, primal hunger. I stepped back from the edge, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew with a certainty that defied logic that something was down there, something ancient, something evil. As I turned to retreat, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The ice cracked and groaned, the sound like the breaking of bones. The crevasse widened, the darkness within growing deeper, more menacing. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, gaunt, and impossibly pale, it stood at the edge of the crevasse, silhouetted against the swirling snow. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, burning into my soul. It was Ben, but it was Ben. Something had taken possession of his body, twisted him into a grotesque parody of his former self. His mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. His limbs were elongated, contorted at unnatural angles. "Aris," it rasped, the voice a distorted mockery of Ben's familiar drawl. "They want to be free, and I'm going to help them." He raised his arms, and the ground beneath my feet cracked even further. The sigils on the ice flared with blinding light, and the air crackled with an unnatural energy. I knew in that moment that I had made a terrible mistake. My obsession had unleashed something ancient and terrible upon the world, and I was about to pay the price. Ben jumped into the crevasse and the ice began to tremble again. Then the screams started. The ice screamed louder than ever. They didn't sound like the wind anymore. They sounded like humans, thousands of humans screaming. Then everything went silent. I started to run as fast as I could to the station. I knew that Ben, or whatever was inside of him, was going to go to the station sooner or later. I had to warn Lena and Giant. I had to find a way to stop this madness, even if it meant sacrificing myself. The run felt like an eternity. The storm didn't stop for a second. When I got to the station, the door was open. I went inside and I heard someone crying in the cafeteria. It was Giant. I ran towards him and asked him what was going on. "Lena, she's gone, she left," Giant said. "What, where did she go?" I asked. "I don't know, she just left. She said she had to do something to protect us. She looked scared," Giant responded. "She probably went to try to stop Ben, but she can't. Whatever is inside Ben is too strong. We need to leave," I said. "Leave? Where are we going to go? We are in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by ice and snow," Giant answered. "I don't know, but staying here is a death sentence. We need to think of something," I responded. Suddenly, the lights went out. Chapter 3: Shadows in the Machine. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the cafeteria in a sickly, uneven glow. Giant's face was pale with fear, illuminated from below, making him look like a terrified child. The dripping water, always present, now seemed deafening, each drop a hammer blow against the silence. "What was that?" Giant whispered, his voice trembling. "Probably just the generator," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's been acting up. We need to get to the control room and see what's happening." The control room, located in the heart of the station, was our best bet for information and, potentially, communication. But navigating the labyrinthine corridors in the dim light, knowing that something monstrous was lurking outside, was a terrifying prospect. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The air was thick with tension, every shadow seeming to writhe and shift. The smell of rot was stronger here, almost overpowering. As we rounded a corner, we saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the hallway, bathed in the flickering emergency light. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated and contorted at unnatural angles. It was Ben, or rather, the thing that had taken Ben's form. Its head snapped up and its glowing eyes fixed on us. A wide, unnatural grin spread across its face, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Aris," it rasped, the distorted voice sending shivers down my spine. "I thought you might come back. I have a message." "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They want to show you what they want," it replied. "They want to show you their world." The lights flickered violently, plunging the hallway into darkness for a moment. When they came back on, Ben was gone. "What the hell was that?" Giant exclaimed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we need to get to the control room now," I said, grabbing Giant's arm and pulling him forward. We reached the control room without further incident, but the sight that greeted us was hardly reassuring. The screens were filled with static, the control panels were dark, and the air was thick with the smell of burning electronics. The whole technology was possessed. "Damn it," I muttered, "the power's out." Giant rushed to the main console, his fingers flying across the unresponsive buttons. "I'll see what I can do," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. While Giant worked on restoring the power, I scanned the monitors, trying to find any sign of what was happening outside. The external cameras were offline, but I managed to bring up a thermal imaging display. The image was distorted and grainy, but I could make out a large heat signature moving rapidly towards the station. "We have company," I said, pointing to the screen. "Something coming." Giant grunted in response, his attention focused on the console. After a few minutes of frantic work, he managed to get the main generator back online. The screens flickered to life, and the control room was bathed in a harsh, artificial light. The external cameras were still offline, but Giant managed to restore the station's internal surveillance system. The screens showed the corridors of the station, empty and silent. "Okay, we can see what's happening inside at least," I said. "Let's see if we can find Ben." We watched the monitors, our hearts pounding in our chests as the minutes ticked by. The station seemed deserted, the silence broken only by the dripping water and the hum of the generator. Suddenly, one of the screens flickered, and a figure appeared in the hallway outside the control room. It was Ben, or rather, the thing that had taken Ben's form. It stood there for a moment, its glowing eyes fixed on the camera, a wide, unnatural grin spread across its face. Then, it raised its hand and smashed the camera with a single, brutal blow. The screen went black. "It knows we're here," Giant said, his voice trembling. "We need to get out of here," I said. "This place isn't safe." But where could we go? The station was surrounded by a deadly blizzard, and whatever was outside was clearly hunting us. We were trapped. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from the hallway outside. Something was trying to break down the door. "It's here," Giant whispered. "It's trying to get in." I looked around the control room, desperately searching for a weapon, anything that could help us defend ourselves. My eyes fell on a fire axe hanging on the wall. "Grab that," I said, pointing to the axe. "We're going to need it." Giant hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the axe and held it tightly in his hands. The banging on the door grew louder, more insistent. "Get ready," I said. "It's about to come in." The door splintered and cracked, and the hallway was filled with an unholy growl. The end was here. Chapter 4: The Labyrinth of Fear. The door buckled inward with a deafening crash, showering the control room with splinters of wood and metal. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights, was Ben, or rather, the monstrous mockery of Ben. His body was contorted, his limbs unnaturally elongated, his eyes burning with a malevolent light. The grin on his face was wider, more grotesque than before, revealing rows of teeth that looked far too sharp, far too predatory. "Welcome," it rasped, its voice a horrifying blend of Ben's familiar tones and something else, something ancient and inhuman. "I've been waiting for you." Giant, his face pale and sweat-streaked, raised the fire axe, his hands trembling. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. The creature chuckled, a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the station. "You think that little toy can stop me," it said, its eyes gleaming with amusement. I knew we were outmatched. The axe might slow it down, but it wouldn't kill it. Whatever was possessing Ben was far too powerful, too ancient. We needed to escape, to find some way to survive. "Giant, distract it," I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him towards the back of the control room. Giant hesitated for a moment, then charged forward, swinging the axe with all his might. The creature barely reacted, sidestepping the blow with unnatural speed and grace. The axe slammed into the doorframe, sending another shower of splinters into the air. While Giant kept the creature occupied, I frantically searched for an escape route. The control room was small and cramped with only one door. But then I saw it, a small, almost invisible hatch in the floor, hidden beneath a pile of discarded cables. "Giant, here," I shouted, yanking the cables away from the hatch. "There's a tunnel." The creature snarled, realizing our intentions. It grabbed Giant by the arm, its grip like a vice. Giant screamed in pain as his bones cracked under the pressure. "Go," Giant yelled, his face contorted in agony. "Save yourself." I couldn't leave him, but I knew that if we both stayed, we would die. With a heavy heart, I pried open the hatch and climbed down into the darkness below. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, barely wide enough to crawl through. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. I could hear the creature's enraged roars echoing from above, growing fainter as I moved deeper into the tunnel. I crawled for what felt like an eternity, my hands and knees raw and bleeding. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading me deeper and deeper into the bowels of the station. Finally, I reached the end of the tunnel. It opened into a small, dark room filled with crates and machinery. I recognized it as one of the station's old storage rooms, abandoned and forgotten. I stood up, stretching my aching muscles. The room was cold and damp, but it was a haven compared to the chaos and terror I had left behind. But I knew I couldn't stay there for long. The creature would find me, eventually. I needed to find a way out, to escape the station and warn the world about what I had unleashed. I began to search the storage room, hoping to find something that could help me. Most of the crates were empty, filled with nothing but dust and cobwebs. But then I found it, a small, locked metal box, hidden beneath a pile of old rags. I grabbed the box and tried to pry it open, but it was too strong. I needed something to break it open. I searched the room again and found a rusted crowbar leaning against the wall. I took the crowbar and jammed it into the lock, putting all my weight behind it. The lock snapped with a loud crack and the box flew open. Inside, I found a small, leather-bound book, a compass, and a map. The book was written in Russian, but I recognized the symbols. They were the same sigils I had seen on the ice. The map was a diagram of the station, but it was different from the blueprints I had seen before. It showed a network of tunnels and chambers beneath the station, hidden passages that didn't appear on any official documents. And in the center of the map, marked with a large red X, was a location labeled the source. The source? Was it the source of the power that was possessing Ben, the source of the screams, the source of the rot? I didn't know, but I knew that if I wanted to survive, I needed to find it. I needed to find the source and destroy it before it destroyed me. But before I could even take a step, I heard a scratching sound coming from the tunnel behind me. Something was crawling through the tunnel, getting closer and closer. It had found me. Chapter 5: Whispers of the Deep. The scratching intensified, the sound of claws scraping against the cold, damp earth of the tunnel. My breath hitched in my throat, fear constricting my chest. I knew, with sickening certainty, that whatever was coming wasn't human, wasn't anything I could reason with or fight in a conventional way. I clutched the leather-bound book to my chest, the compass and map clutched tightly in my other hand. The flickering emergency lights cast grotesque shadows that danced around the storage room, turning familiar shapes into monstrous figures. The dripping water echoed like the ticking of a doomsday clock. I scrambled to find a place to hide, but the room offered little in the way of cover. The crates were too flimsy, the machinery too exposed. My only option was to try and blend into the shadows, to become one with the darkness and hope that whatever was coming would pass me by. I pressed myself against the wall, behind a large, rusted generator, and closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing to slow my racing heart. But the scratching grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the tunnel entrance. Then silence. The silence was worse than the scratching. It was pregnant with anticipation, heavy with dread. I could feel the creature's presence, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to seep into my very being. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. Standing in the tunnel entrance was Ben, or what was left of him. His body was even more contorted, more grotesque than before. His limbs were twisted at impossible angles, his skin stretched taut over bone. His eyes burned with a malevolent red light, and his mouth was stretched into a wide, impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of teeth that looked like shards of glass. But it wasn't just his physical appearance that had changed. There was something else, something deeper, something far more terrifying. An aura of ancient, primal evil that radiated from him, that seemed to warp the very air around him. "Hello, Aris," it rasped, its voice a horrifying blend of Ben's familiar tones and the guttural growl of something inhuman. "Did you think you could escape me? You can't escape them. They're everywhere." It took a step into the storage room, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. "They want to show you their world," it continued, its eyes fixed on mine. "They want you to join them." I knew that whatever was possessing Ben was trying to break me, to erode my will, to make me susceptible to its influence. I couldn't let that happen. I had to fight, to resist, even if it meant certain death. "I'll never join you," I said, my voice trembling but defiant. "I'll never let you win." The creature chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You have no choice, Aris," it said. "They're already inside you, you just don't know it yet." It took another step closer, its eyes burning into my soul. I could feel its presence inside me, a cold, invasive force trying to burrow its way into my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, to resist its influence. But it was no use. The creature's voice echoed in my head, whispering insidious thoughts, preying on my fears, my insecurities, my darkest desires. "You're weak, Aris," it whispered. "You're afraid, you're alone." It was right, I was weak, I was afraid, I was alone, but I couldn't let that define me. I had to fight, to find the strength within myself to resist. I opened my eyes and stared at the creature, my gaze unwavering. "I may be weak, but I'm not broken," I said. "I won't let you control me." The creature snarled, its face contorted in rage. It lunged at me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. I knew I couldn't fight it physically. I was no match for its strength and speed. But I had one advantage, the leather-bound book. I raised the book and held it out in front of me, the sigils on its cover glowing faintly in the darkness. "I know what you are," I said, "and I know how to stop you." The creature hesitated, its eyes fixed on the book. It seemed to recognize the symbols, to understand their power. "You can't stop them," it rasped. "They're too strong, they're too many." I didn't know if it was true, but I had to try. I had to believe that I could stop them, that I could save the world from the ancient evil that had been unleashed. I opened the book and began to read, my voice trembling but determined. The words were in Russian, but I understood their meaning, their power. They were a banishment ritual, a series of incantations designed to drive away evil spirits. As I read, the sigils on the book glowed brighter and brighter, filling the storage room with an ethereal light. The creature recoiled, its eyes wide with fear. "No," it shrieked, its voice filled with terror. "You can't do this, you'll doom us all." I ignored its pleas and continued to read, my voice growing stronger, more confident with each word. The air crackled with energy, the ground trembled beneath my feet, and the creature began to convulse, its body writhing in agony. Then, with a final, agonizing shriek, it collapsed to the floor, its body lifeless and still. I stopped reading, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sigils on the book faded, the ethereal light extinguished. The storage room was silent once more, save for the dripping water and the howling wind. I had done it. I had banished the creature, but I knew that it wasn't over. The ancient evil was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its chance to strike again. And I knew that I had to stop it. I had to find the source and destroy it before it destroyed everything. I looked at the map, my gaze fixed on the red X that marked the location of the source. It was deep beneath the station, in a place that had been hidden for centuries. I knew that the journey would be long and dangerous, but I had no choice. I had to go. I had to face the darkness and fight for the survival of humanity. I took a deep breath, steeled my resolve, and stepped out of the storage room, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The whispers of the deep called to me, and I knew that my nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 6: The Heart of the Machine. The storage room offered a brief respite, a moment of fragile victory, but the station itself was a predator's lair, and I knew I couldn't linger. I needed to reach the source, and the map was my only guide through this labyrinth of decaying metal and forgotten secrets. The map indicated a series of maintenance tunnels, hidden behind the main power conduits in the station's central core. These tunnels, likely built during the station's initial construction, were never officially documented, a testament to the paranoia and clandestine activities that had permeated Outpost 31 from the very beginning. The central core was the heart of the station, a cacophony of whirring generators, sparking wires, and hissing steam. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the ever-present scent of rot, which seemed even stronger here, as if the very machinery was decaying from the inside out. Navigating the core was a treacherous dance between exposed wiring and pools of standing water, each step a potential electrocution hazard. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that played tricks on my eyes. As I moved deeper into the core, I noticed something unsettling. The machinery seemed to be changing. Gears that were once stationary now spun wildly, pipes pulsed with a dark, viscous fluid, and the generators emitted a low, guttural hum that resonated deep within my chest. The technology was infused with eeriness, as if the station itself was becoming corrupted, infected by the same ancient evil that had possessed Ben. I reached the main power conduits, a massive network of cables and pipes that snaked across the walls and ceiling. Hidden behind them, almost invisible in the dim light, was a small metal door, unmarked and unassuming. This had to be it, the entrance to the maintenance tunnels. I pulled the door open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway. The air inside was cold and damp, and the smell of rot was almost unbearable. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling on the door handle. I knew that beyond this door lay unknown horrors, that I was venturing deeper into the heart of darkness. But I had no choice. I had to press on to find the source and destroy it before it destroyed everything. I took a deep breath and stepped into the tunnel, pulling the door shut behind me. The maintenance tunnels were even more claustrophobic than the storage room. The ceiling was low, forcing me to hunch over, and the walls were damp and slimy. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The tunnels twisted and turned, forming a labyrinth of corridors that seemed to defy all logic. I consulted the map, trying to stay oriented, but the tunnels seemed to shift and change around me, as if the station itself was trying to disorient me, to lead me astray. As I moved deeper into the tunnels, I began to hear whispers. Faint, almost inaudible voices that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Leave," they whispered. "Turn back, you don't want to know." I tried to ignore the whispers, to focus on the map and the task at hand. But they grew louder, more insistent, preying on my fears, my doubts, my insecurities. "You're going to die," they whispered. "They're waiting for you, you can't stop them." I pressed on, determined to resist the whispers to maintain my sanity. But the tunnels seemed to be getting to me, eroding my resolve, weakening my will. Then I saw it, a faint light at the end of the tunnel, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the light, to escape the claustrophobic tunnels and the insidious whispers. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a large, circular chamber. The chamber was lit by a series of strange, glowing crystals that hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie, ethereal light. In the center of the chamber was a massive, pulsating machine, a grotesque amalgamation of metal, flesh, and bone. The machine was connected to the walls and ceiling by a network of cables and pipes, which pulsed with a dark, viscous fluid. This was it, the source. The air in the chamber was thick with the smell of rot and the sound of whispers. The whispers were louder here, more insistent, more terrifying. "Welcome," they whispered. "We've been waiting for you." I looked around the chamber, trying to find the source of the whispers, and then I saw them. Hidden in the shadows, clinging to the walls and ceiling, were figures. Tall, gaunt, and impossibly pale, they resembled men, but they were different. Their bodies were even more contorted, more grotesque, their eyes burning with a malevolent red light. They were the whispers, the voices that had been tormenting me, trying to break me, to lead me astray. They were the guardians of the source, and they were ready to protect it at all costs. One of the figures stepped forward, its eyes fixed on mine. "You can't stop us," it rasped, its voice a horrifying blend of Ben's familiar tones and the guttural growl of something inhuman. "We are the future. We are the truth." "You're monsters," I said, my voice trembling but defiant. "You're a plague upon this world." The figure chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "We are what you will become," it said. "Join us, Aris, embrace the darkness." I knew that whatever was possessing these figures was trying to corrupt me, to turn me into one of them. I couldn't let that happen. I had to fight, to resist, even if it meant certain death. "I'll never join you," I said. "I'll never let you win." The figure snarled, its face contorted in rage. It lunged at me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. The battle for the source had begun. Chapter 7: Symphony of Decay. The figure lunged, a blur of twisted limbs and malevolent intent. The other guardians stirred in the shadows, their eyes burning with anticipation. I knew I couldn't face them all at once. My only chance was to use the environment to turn the chamber itself into a weapon. The leather-bound book was still clutched in my hand, the sigils on its cover faintly glowing in the eerie light. It was my only defense, my only weapon against the ancient evil that permeated this place. As the first guardian closed in, I sidestepped, narrowly avoiding its outstretched claws. I stumbled back towards the pulsating machine at the center of the chamber. The air around the machine crackled with energy, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Don't touch it," they shrieked. "It's ours, you don't understand." I ignored them, my eyes fixed on the machine. It was a grotesque masterpiece of decay, a symphony of metal, flesh, and bone. Cables and pipes snaked across its surface, poolsing with a dark, viscous fluid that seemed to writhe and churn like living blood. I knew that the machine was the source of the evil, the focal point of the ancient energy that had corrupted the station and possessed its inhabitants. I also knew that it was incredibly unstable. If I could overload the machine, disrupt its energy flow, I might be able to destroy the source and banish the evil that had been unleashed. But how? I had no tools, no weapons, no way to interact with the machine without risking my own corruption. Then I remembered the crystals. The glowing crystals that hung from the ceiling, illuminating the chamber. They seemed to be feeding energy into the machine, channeling its power from some unknown source. If I could destroy the crystals, sever the machine's connection to its power source, I might be able to create the overload I needed. The first guardian was upon me, its claws slashing at my face. I ducked, avoiding the blow, and thrust the leather-bound book forward, the sigils on its cover glowing brightly. The guardian recoiled, hissing in pain. I used the opportunity to scramble away towards the nearest crystal. The other guardians moved to intercept me, but I was too fast. I dodged and weaved through the shadows, using the machine as a shield, keeping the guardians at bay. I reached the crystal and grabbed it with both hands. It was cold and smooth, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic energy. I could feel its power coursing through my veins, a strange, intoxicating sensation that threatened to overwhelm my senses. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, trying to dissuade me to break my will. "Don't do it," they shrieked. "You'll destroy yourself, you'll destroy everything." I ignored them, focusing all my energy on the crystal. I closed my eyes and concentrated, channeling my anger, my fear, my desperation into a single, focused point. Then I slammed the crystal against the machine, shattering it into a million pieces. The chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light. The machine shuddered violently, its cables and pipes thrashing like dying snakes. The whispers turned into screams, a chorus of pain and terror that reverberated through the station. The guardians recoiled, their bodies writhing in agony. They clutched at their heads, their eyes burning with even greater intensity. I staggered back, shielding my eyes from the light. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the stench of decay. The machine began to overload, its energy output spiraling out of control. The chamber shook violently, the walls cracking and groaning. I knew I had to escape, to get out of the chamber before the machine exploded. I turned and ran, dodging the collapsing debris, ignoring the screams of the guardians. I reached the tunnel entrance and plunged into the darkness, crawling as fast as I could, away from the chaos and destruction. Behind me, the chamber exploded in a cataclysmic burst of energy. The station shook violently, the ground trembling beneath my feet. I kept crawling, driven by fear and adrenaline, determined to escape the station and survive. I didn't know if I had succeeded in destroying the source, but I knew that I had done everything I could. Now all I could do was run. Chapter 8: The Ghost of Sanity. The explosion behind me was a physical force, a shockwave that propelled me forward through the narrow maintenance tunnel. Debris rained down, stinging my skin and filling my lungs with dust and the acrid tang of burning metal. The tunnel itself threatened to collapse, the walls groaning and shifting under the immense strain. I crawled blindly, driven by instinct, the memory of that grotesque machine and the tormented guardians fueling my desperate flight. The leather-bound book, miraculously still clutched in my hand, felt like a lifeline, a tangible reminder of my purpose. The whispers, once so insidious and pervasive, were now reduced to faint, fragmented echoes, cries of pain and terror that faded with each meter I put between myself and the source. Had I truly destroyed it, or simply wounded it, driving it back into the shadows to fester and regroup? The thought gnawed at me, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of my exhausted mind. Was this victory real, or just a temporary reprieve from the horrors that had consumed Outpost 31? I finally reached the end of the maintenance tunnel, collapsing into the central core, coughing and gasping for breath. The core was in chaos, the machinery sparking and sputtering, the emergency lights flickering wildly. The smell of ozone was overpowering, and the stench of rot lingered in the air, a lingering reminder of the evil I had faced. But something was different. The oppressive atmosphere, the sense of dread that had permeated the station, was lighter. The machinery still hummed and whirred, but the guttural undertones were gone, replaced by a more natural, mechanical rhythm. The whispers were silent. Had the source truly been destroyed? Was the station finally free of its influence? Cautiously, I stood up, brushing the dust and debris from my clothes. The central core was still a hazardous environment, but it felt safer. I needed to find Giant. He might still be alive, trapped somewhere in the station. The thought spurred me into action, overriding my exhaustion and fear. I moved through the core, calling out Giant's name, my voice echoing eerily in the semi-darkness. No response. I checked the control room, but it was empty, the door still splintered and broken. The monitor screens were dark, the power cut off in the explosion. Where could he be? Had he escaped? Or had the creatures gotten to him before I could? I continued my search, moving through the familiar corridors of the station, each step a testament to its decaying state. The walls were cracked and crumbling, the floors were uneven, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The station felt different, emptier somehow, as if the explosion had not only destroyed the source but also purged the station of its lingering presence. But the silence was unnerving, too quiet, too expectant. I reached the cafeteria, the place where I had last seen Giant, the place where Lena had uttered those chilling words, "Follow protocol to the letter." The cafeteria was a mess, tables overturned, chairs scattered, food spilled on the floor. A scene of desperate flight or a brutal struggle. Then I saw him. Giant was slumped against a wall, his eyes closed, his face pale and bloodied. He was still clutching the fire axe, his knuckles white with tension. "Giant," I shouted, rushing to his side. "Are you okay?" He opened his eyes, blinking slowly, his gaze unfocused. "Aris," he mumbled, his voice weak and raspy. "Is it over?" "I think so," I said, helping him sit up. "I destroyed the source, but I don't know what happened to Lena." Giant coughed, wincing in pain. "Lena, she came back," he said. "After you left, she was different." "Different how?" I asked, my heart sinking. "She was calm," Giant said. "Too calm. She said she knew what to do. She said she had to cleanse the station." "Cleanse the station? What does that mean?" I asked, my voice rising in alarm. Giant shook his head, his eyes clouding with confusion. "I don't know," he said. She went to the lower levels, said she had to finish what she started." The lower levels. The unexplored sections of the station, the areas that had been sealed off for decades, the areas that were rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of the past. Lena had gone there alone to cleanse the station, and whatever she meant by that, I knew it couldn't be good. I looked at Giant, his face pale and bloodied, his body weak and trembling. He was in no condition to go anywhere. "Stay here," I said. "Rest. I'm going to find Lena." Giant nodded weakly, closing his eyes. "Be careful, Aris," he whispered. Something's wrong, something's still not right. I knew he was right. The whispers were gone, the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, but something still felt off. A lingering sense of unease, a ghost of sanity haunting the station. I took a deep breath, steeled my resolve, and turned towards the lower levels. I had destroyed the source, but my nightmare was far from over. Lena was still out there, and whatever she was planning, I had to stop her. The journey into the darkness had begun anew. Chapter 9: Descent into Madness. The lower levels of Outpost 31 were a world apart from the relative order and functionality of the upper decks. Here, the station was a decaying tomb, a testament to decades of neglect and decay. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, mold, and a strange, acrid chemical odor that stung my nostrils. The emergency lights were non-existent, plunging the corridors into near-total darkness. My only source of illumination was a small flashlight I had scavenged from the control room. Its beam danced across the walls, revealing grotesque shapes and shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in the periphery of my vision. The architecture was even more unsettling here, a chaotic jumble of twisting corridors, dead-end passages, and rooms with no discernible purpose. The floors were uneven, riddled with holes and cracks, and the walls were covered in strange, indecipherable symbols, scrawled in what appeared to be blood. The temperature plummeted as I descended, the cold seeping into my bones, numbing my senses. I could feel the weight of the ice pressing down on the station, a constant reminder of our isolation and vulnerability. As I moved deeper into the lower levels, I began to hear sounds. Faint, almost inaudible noises that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Whispers, moans, and the faint, rhythmic chanting of voices I couldn't quite understand. The sounds were unsettling, but they were different from the whispers I had heard in the chamber of the source. These were more human, more grounded in reality. They sounded like the echoes of past suffering, the lingering remnants of the horrors that had transpired in this place. I followed the sounds, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing a series of derelict laboratories, storage rooms, and living quarters. Each room was a scene of abject decay, filled with rusted equipment, rotting furniture, and the skeletal remains of long-dead creatures. The laboratories were particularly disturbing, filled with bizarre contraptions and half-finished experiments that suggested a relentless pursuit of knowledge without regard for morality or ethics. Jars filled with grotesque specimens lined the shelves, their contents swirling in a murky formaldehyde solution. Dissecting tables were stained with dried blood, and surgical instruments lay scattered about, their surfaces corroded and tarnished. What kind of experiments had been conducted here? What dark secrets had been unearthed in these forgotten laboratories? I found a tattered logbook lying on one of the dissecting tables, its pages filled with handwritten notes in Russian. I couldn't read the language, but the diagrams and sketches were chilling. They depicted human figures being subjected to various forms of torture and experimentation, their bodies contorted and mutilated in horrifying ways. The logbook offered a glimpse into the dark heart of Outpost 31, revealing the twisted ambitions and depraved experiments that had ultimately led to its downfall. As I continued my descent, the sounds grew louder, more insistent, drawing me towards their source. I reached a large, metal door sealed shut with a series of heavy bolts and chains. The door was marked with a strange symbol, a circle enclosing a downward-pointing arrow, a symbol I didn't recognize. The sounds were coming from behind this door. The chanting, the moans, the whispers, they were all emanating from the depths of this sealed-off chamber. I knew that Lena was behind this door, and whatever she was planning, it was connected to the horrors that had transpired in this place. I pulled at the bolts and chains, struggling to break them free. They were rusted and corroded, but they held firm, resisting my efforts. I needed something to break them open. I searched the surrounding area, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing a pile of discarded tools and equipment. I found a heavy sledgehammer, its head covered in rust. It was exactly what I needed. I hefted the sledgehammer and swung it at the bolts and chains, putting all my weight behind each blow. The metal rang out with a deafening clang, echoing through the lower levels. Finally, after several minutes of strenuous effort, the bolts and chains snapped, freeing the door. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, revealing a chamber filled with an eerie, ethereal light. The chamber was vast and circular, its walls lined with strange, glowing crystals similar to the ones I had seen in the chamber of the source. In the center of the chamber was a large, stone altar, stained with what appeared to be blood. And standing before the altar, chanting in a low, rhythmic voice, was Lena. She was dressed in a long, white robe, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes were closed and her hands were raised towards the ceiling. She looked like a priestess, conducting some kind of ancient ritual. Surrounding the altar were figures. Tall, gaunt, and impossibly pale, they resembled Ben, but they were different. Their bodies were even more contorted, more grotesque, their eyes burning with a malevolent red light. They were the guardians of the source, the creatures I had thought I had destroyed. They were still alive, and they were under Lena's control. Lena opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on mine. A faint smile played across her lips. "Aris," she said, her voice calm and serene. "You've come to join us, I'm so glad." "What are you doing, Lena?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What is this place?" "This is the cleansing," she said. "This is the rebirth. We are purging the station of its impurities, preparing it for a new age." "You're insane," I said. "This is madness. You have to stop this." Lena shook her head, her smile widening. "It's too late, Aris," she said. "The process has already begun. We are about to unleash a power that will transform the world." "I won't let you," I said, raising the sledgehammer. "I'll stop you even if it kills me." Lena chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't stop us, Aris," she said. "We are the future, we are the truth." She raised her hands towards the ceiling, and the crystals began to glow brighter, filling the chamber with a blinding light. The guardians surged forward, their eyes burning with a malevolent red light. The battle for the soul of Outpost 31 had reached its climax. Chapter 10: The Cleansing Fire. The guardians surged forward, a wave of twisted limbs and burning eyes. I hefted the sledgehammer, adrenaline coursing through my veins, preparing to meet their onslaught. Lena stood motionless before the altar, her eyes closed, her face serene, the chanting continuing unbroken, a hypnotic drone that threatened to drown out all reason. This wasn't the Lena I knew. This was something else, something twisted and corrupted by the ancient power that permeated this chamber. Her calm demeanor was more terrifying than any scream, her unwavering conviction a chilling contrast to the madness that surrounded her. The first guardian reached me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. I swung the sledgehammer with all my might, aiming for its head. The hammer connected with a sickening thud, crushing bone, and sending a spray of blood and brain matter across the chamber. The guardian staggered back, its body convulsing, before collapsing to the floor, lifeless. But the other guardians were already upon me, their movements swift and relentless. I fought desperately, swinging the sledgehammer with a ferocity born of desperation. I smashed skulls, shattered limbs, and crushed bodies, but the guardians kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. They were stronger, faster, and more resilient than any human being. They seemed to be fueled by the very energy that permeated this chamber, drawing power from the crystals and Lena's chanting. I was outnumbered, outmatched, and exhausted. Each swing of the sledgehammer drained my strength. Each blow I landed seemed to have little effect. The guardians clawed at me, tearing at my clothes, scratching my skin, their burning eyes fixed on mine, their faces contorted in grotesque grins. I felt my strength waning, my resolve faltering. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, threatening to overwhelm my senses. Lena's words seemed to seep into my mind, whispering insidious thoughts, preying on my fears, my doubts, my insecurities. "Join us, Aris," she whispered. "Embrace the darkness, there is no escape." I fought against the whispers, trying to block them out to maintain my sanity. But it was no use. Lena's influence was too strong, her power too great. I stumbled back, my vision blurring, my body aching. The guardians closed in, their eyes burning with triumph. I knew I was about to die. But even in the face of certain death, I refused to surrender. I would not let Lena win. I would not let the ancient evil that had corrupted this station consume the world. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and focused all my remaining energy on the leather-bound book, still clutched tightly in my hand. The sigils on its cover glowed faintly, a last beacon of hope in the darkness. I knew that the book contained a ritual, a cleansing fire that could purge this chamber of its corruption. But I also knew that the ritual was dangerous, that it could consume me as well. But I had no choice. It was my only chance to stop Lena, to destroy the Guardians, to save the world. I opened my eyes and began to read, my voice trembling but determined. The words were in Russian, but I understood their meaning, their power. They were a summons, a call to the ancient forces of light and darkness, a desperate plea for salvation. As I read, the sigils on the book glowed brighter and brighter, filling the chamber with an ethereal light. The guardians recoiled, hissing in pain. Lena stopped chanting, her eyes widening in alarm. "What are you doing, Aris?" she shrieked, her voice filled with terror. "You can't do this, you'll destroy us all." I ignored her pleas and continued to read, my voice growing stronger, more confident with each word. The air crackled with energy, the ground trembled beneath my feet, and the crystals began to pulse with an unnatural light. The chamber was filled with a blinding white light, a purifying fire that burned away the shadows and the darkness. The guardians screamed, their bodies writhing in agony. They burst into flames, their twisted forms consumed by the cleansing fire. Lena stood before the altar, her eyes wide with horror, her face contorted in a mask of fear. The fire surrounded her, licking at her skin, but she remained motionless, transfixed by the power of the ritual. I knew that she was about to die, but I also knew that she had to be stopped. I reached out my hand, trying to pull her away from the altar, to save her from the fire. But it was too late. The fire engulfed her, consuming her body in a blazing inferno. She screamed, a long, agonizing cry that echoed through the chamber. Then silence. The fire subsided, leaving behind a chamber filled with smoke and ash. The guardians were gone, reduced to piles of smoldering embers. Lena was gone, her body completely consumed by the flames. The crystals flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness. I stood alone in the darkness, exhausted, wounded, and heartbroken. I had destroyed the Guardians, I had stopped Lena, but at what cost? The lower levels of Outpost 31 were silent once more, but the silence was different now. It was the silence of death, the silence of despair, the silence of a world forever changed. I had survived, but I was not sure if I had won. Chapter 11, Echoes of the Past. The sudden darkness after the cleansing fire was almost disorienting. My eyes struggled to adjust, the blackness feeling heavier, more absolute than any I'd experienced before. The silence, too, was profound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of chanting and screams that had filled the chamber only moments ago. It was a silence that felt final. The stench of burnt flesh and ash hung heavy in the air, a grim testament to the destruction I had wrought. I stumbled forward, my body aching, my mind reeling from the events that had transpired. I needed to get out of here, to escape the lower levels and find Giant, to see if he was still alive. As I made my way back towards the entrance, I noticed something strange. The faint, rhythmic chanting had returned, but it was different now. It was softer, more distant, and it seemed to be coming from below. Below the chamber, in the unexplored depths of Outpost 31. I hesitated, my hand trembling on the doorknob. I had thought I had destroyed the source, purged the station of its evil, but the chanting suggested otherwise. Was there something else down there? Something even more ancient, more powerful than what I had already faced? I didn't want to go back. I was exhausted, wounded, and emotionally drained. I had done everything I could, sacrificed everything I had. But I knew I couldn't leave. If there was still a threat lurking in the depths of the station, I had to confront it, to destroy it, before it could spread its corruption any further. I took a deep breath, steeled my resolve, and turned towards the source of the chanting. The chamber was connected to a series of tunnels that led deeper into the lower levels. The tunnels were even more narrow and claustrophobic than the ones I had already traversed, their walls covered in strange, pulsating growths that emitted a faint, bioluminescent glow. The air was thick with a cloying, sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. The chanting grew louder as I descended, its rhythm hypnotic and unsettling. As I moved deeper into the tunnels, I began to see images. Flashes of memory, projected onto the walls, fleeting glimpses into the past. I saw scientists in white coats, conducting experiments on terrified subjects. I saw soldiers in Soviet uniforms patrolling the corridors, their faces grim and determined. I saw shadowy figures, performing strange rituals in the light of the glowing crystals. These were the echoes of the past, the lingering remnants of the horrors that had transpired in Outpost 31. They were not mere hallucinations. They were fragments of reality, imprinted onto the fabric of the station, waiting to be reawakened. The tunnels led me to a large, circular chamber, similar to the one I had just left. But this chamber was different. It was older, more decayed, its walls covered in intricate carvings and strange symbols. In the center of the chamber was a massive stone structure, resembling a ziggurat. The ziggurat was covered in the same pulsating growths that lined the walls of the tunnels, its surface emitting a faint, bioluminescent glow. And standing atop the ziggurat, chanting in a low, rhythmic voice, was a figure. The figure was tall and gaunt, its body draped in a long, flowing robe. Its face was hidden behind a mask, a grotesque visage of bone and metal. It was the source of the chanting, the source of the images, the source of the evil that permeated Outpost 31. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was the true mastermind behind the events that had transpired. The puppet master pulling the strings, the ancient evil that had been waiting for centuries to be unleashed. The figure turned towards me, its masked face fixed on mine. A low, guttural chuckle echoed through the chamber. "Welcome, Aris," it rasped, its voice a horrifying blend of human and inhuman tones. "I have been expecting you." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling but defiant. "What is this place?" "I am the guardian," it said, "the protector of this sacred site, and this is the heart of the darkness, the place where all things begin and end." "You're insane," I said. "This is madness, you have to stop this." The guardian chuckled again, its masked face contorted in amusement. "It is too late, Aris," it said. "The process has already begun. The world is about to be reborn in fire and blood." "I won't let you," I said, raising my fists. "I'll stop you even if it kills me." The guardian shook its head, its masked face filled with pity. "You cannot stop me, Aris," it said. "I am beyond your comprehension. I am the master of this place." It raised its hands towards the ceiling, and the ziggurat began to glow brighter, filling the chamber with an intense, blinding light. The carvings on the walls came to life, their symbols swirling and shifting, creating a hypnotic vortex of energy. I felt my mind begin to unravel, my thoughts becoming fragmented and disjointed. The Guardian's power was overwhelming, its influence insidious. I struggled to resist, to maintain my sanity, but it was no use. The Guardian was in control. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the end. Chapter 12. The Mask of Truth. The light intensified, searing my eyelids, forcing me to shield my face with my arms. The chanting grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to burrow into my skull, scrambling my thoughts, erasing my memories. I felt myself losing control, my will dissolving under the sheer force of the Guardian's power. Just as I thought I would succumb, just as I felt my identity fracturing and dissolving, a sudden, searing pain ripped through my mind. It was as if a red-hot poker had been plunged directly into my brain, burning away the fog and confusion, restoring my clarity of thought. The light dimmed slightly, the chanting subsided, and the Guardian staggered back, its masked face contorted in surprise. What is happening?" It rasped, its voice laced with fear. I lowered my arms, my eyes focusing on the Guardian. The pain in my head was still intense, but it was manageable. I could feel the Guardian's power weakening, its influence fading. Then I understood. The leather-bound book. I had been clutching it tightly in my hand, its sigils pressed against my skin. The book was not just a weapon against evil. It was a shield, a protection against corruption. It had saved me from Lena's influence, and it was saving me now. The sigils on the book glowed brightly, their power surging through my veins, bolstering my resolve, reinforcing my will. "I am not afraid of you," I said, my voice strong and clear. "I will not let you win." The Guardian snarled, its masked face contorted in rage. "You fool," it shrieked. "You cannot comprehend the power that I wield. I am the master of this place, the Guardian of the Gate. I will crush you, and I will use your soul to fuel the rebirth of the world." It raised its hands towards me, and the ziggurat began to emit a series of pulsing energy waves, each wave carrying a torrent of psychic force, designed to break my mind and enslave my soul. I braced myself against the onslaught, the book pressed tightly against my chest, the sigils glowing with an almost blinding intensity. The energy waves crashed over me, buffeting my mind, trying to tear down my defenses. I felt myself wavering, my resolve weakening, but the book held firm, its power shielding me from the worst of the assault. I closed my eyes and focused on the sigils, visualizing their power flowing through me, reinforcing my will, strengthening my resolve. I drew upon the memories of my father, his unwavering dedication to science, his tireless pursuit of truth. I drew upon the memory of Jayan, his quiet strength, his unwavering loyalty. I drew upon the memory of Lena, her initial skepticism, her ultimate sacrifice. And I drew upon my own obsession, my own relentless pursuit of knowledge, my own determination to uncover the secrets of Outpost 31. I would not let the Guardian break me. I would not let him corrupt me. I would not let him win. I opened my eyes and stared at the Guardian, my gaze unwavering. "You are not a master," I said. "You are a prisoner, a slave to the darkness." The Guardian recoiled, its masked face contorted in confusion. What are you saying?" it rasped. "You think you are in control," I said, "but you are merely a vessel, a puppet dancing to the tune of an ancient evil." The Guardian hesitated, its movements becoming jerky and uncertain. I could sense its doubt, its confusion, its fear. Then I knew what I had to do. The ziggurat. It was the source of the Guardian's power, the focal point of the ancient evil that controlled it. If I could destroy the ziggurat, I could sever the Guardian's connection to the darkness, freeing it from its control. But how? I had no weapons, no tools, no way to interact with the ziggurat without risking my own corruption. Then I remembered the words of the ritual. The cleansing fire. It had purged the previous chamber of its evil, consuming the Guardians and destroying Lena. It was a powerful force, a destructive energy that could obliterate anything in its path. If I could channel the power of the ritual, focus it on the ziggurat, I might be able to destroy it. But it was a dangerous gamble. The ritual was unpredictable, its power volatile. It could consume me as well, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. But I had no other choice. I took a deep breath, steeled my resolve, and began to chant, my voice echoing through the chamber. The words were in Russian, but I understood their meaning, their power. They were a summons, a call to the ancient forces of light and darkness, a desperate plea for salvation. As I chanted, the sigils on the book glowed brighter and brighter, filling the chamber with an ethereal light. The guardian recoiled, its masked face contorted in horror. "No," it shrieked, "you cannot do this, you will destroy everything." I ignored its pleas and continued to chant, my voice growing stronger, more confident with each word. The air crackled with energy, the ground trembled beneath my feet, and the ziggurat began to pulse with an unnatural light. The carvings on the walls came to life, their symbols swirling and shifting, creating a chaotic vortex of power. The light focused on the guardian, bathing it in an intense, blinding radiance. The guardian screamed, its body writhing in agony. Then slowly, deliberately, I reached out and removed its mask. Beneath the mask was not a monster, not a demon, not an ancient evil. It was a human face, gaunt and pale, but undeniably human. A face filled with pain, confusion, and a flicker of hope. The face of my father. Chapter 13. The Shattered Reflection. The shock was a physical blow, a gut-wrenching revelation that threatened to shatter my sanity. My father, here, the guardian, the source of all this horror, my own father. It was impossible. Yet staring back at me, gaunt and ravaged as it was undeniably the face of the man I had thought lost to the Arctic decades ago. The same piercing blue eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw, the same weariness. The chanting faltered, the words catching in my throat. The power of the ritual wavered, the cleansing fire threatening to extinguish itself. "Father," I whispered, my voice trembling, is that really you?" His eyes, no longer burning with malevolent red light, flickered with a flicker of recognition, a spark of lucidity in the abyss of madness. "Aris," he rasped, his voice weak and strained, a mere echo of the man I remembered. "My son, is that you?" Tears welled in my eyes, blurring my vision. He knew me. After all these years, after all the corruption and torment, he still knew me. What happened to you?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion. "Where have you been all this time?" His eyes clouded over again, the brief moment of lucidity fading, replaced by a look of confusion and pain. I don't understand," he said. "I've been here, always protecting the gate, waiting for the rebirth." "The gate?" I asked. "What gate, what rebirth?" He shook his head, his face contorting in agony. They control me," he said. "They whisper in my ear, they make me do terrible things." "Who controls you, father?" I asked, my voice pleading. "Who is making you do this?" But before he could answer, a surge of energy coursed through the chamber, emanating from the ziggurat. The carvings on the walls glowed brighter, the symbols swirling faster, and the guardian's body began to convulse. His eyes burned red again, his face contorting into a grotesque grin. "Enough!" he shrieked, his voice now a horrifying blend of my father's familiar tones and the guttural growl of something inhuman. "I will not allow you to interfere. The rebirth must proceed." He raised his hands towards me, and the ziggurat unleashed another wave of psychic force, even stronger than before. I braced myself against the assault, the book pressed tightly against my chest, the sigils glowing with all their might. But this time the energy wave was too powerful. It overwhelmed the book's defenses, searing my mind, shattering my will. I felt myself losing control again, my thoughts becoming fragmented and disjointed. The guardian's power was overwhelming, its influence insidious. But this time it was different. This time, it wasn't just the guardian's power that was assailing me. It was the pain, the grief, the horror of knowing that the man I had idolized, the man I had dedicated my life to finding, had been reduced to this, a twisted puppet of an ancient evil. The emotional impact was devastating, crippling my resolve, leaving me vulnerable to the Guardian's influence. I stumbled back, my vision blurring, my body trembling. The Guardian closed in, its masked face contorted in triumph. "It is over, Aris," it rasped. "You cannot resist. Embrace the darkness, become one with the rebirth." I knew I was about to break. I could feel the Guardian's influence taking hold, twisting my thoughts, corrupting my soul. Just as I was about to succumb, just as I felt myself becoming another puppet of the darkness, I saw something. A flicker of movement behind the Guardian, a fleeting glimpse of something that didn't belong. It was a reflection, a distorted, wavering image in the polished surface of the ziggurat. The reflection showed the chamber as it truly was, stripped of its illusions and enchantments. The ziggurat was not a sacred monument. It was a crude, decaying structure covered in mold and grime. The carvings on the walls were not ancient symbols of power. They were the meaningless scribblings of madmen. And the Guardian was not a powerful sorcerer. He was a broken, tormented old man, his body ravaged by disease, his mind shattered by trauma. The mask he wore was not a symbol of authority. It was a disguise, a pathetic attempt to conceal his true self, to hide from the horrors he had endured. In that moment, I understood. The Guardian's power was not real. It was an illusion, a carefully constructed facade designed to intimidate and control. He was not a master, he was a victim. And the only way to break his control was to shatter the illusion, to expose the truth. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and focused all my remaining energy on a single, desperate act. I reached out with my mind, not with violence, but with compassion, with empathy, with love. I reached out to the shattered soul of my father, and I whispered his name. "Father," I said, "it's okay. You're not alone. I'm here." And then I shattered the reflection. Chapter 14, The Unburdening. The moment I shattered the reflection, the chamber erupted in chaos. The illusion that had held the Guardian's power together dissolved, leaving behind a raw, untamed energy that surged through the room like a tidal wave. The ziggurat shuddered violently, its carvings crumbling and collapsing. The pulsating growths that covered its surface withered and died, their bioluminescent glow extinguished. The air crackled with electricity, and the ground trembled beneath my feet. The Guardian screamed, a long, agonizing cry that echoed through the chamber. His body convulsed, his limbs flailing wildly. The red light in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a look of confusion and terror. He clutched at his head, his masked face contorted in pain. "No, no, it can't be," he rasped. "The power, it's fading." I ignored the chaos around me, focusing all my attention on my father. His body was still trembling, his face still etched with pain, but there was a new light in his eyes, a flicker of awareness, a spark of hope. "Father," I said again, my voice soft and gentle, "it's over, you're free now." He looked at me, his gaze unfocused, his mind struggling to comprehend. "Aris," he whispered, is that really you?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, Father," I said, "it's me, I'm here." He reached out his hand, his fingers gnarled and trembling. I took his hand in mine, holding it tightly, feeling the warmth of his touch, the strength of his grip. I don't understand," he said. "What happened? Where am I?" "You're safe now, Father," I said. "You're with me. We're going to get out of here. We're going to go home." He looked around the chamber, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. "This place, it's terrible," he said. "I don't want to be here anymore." "I know, Father," I said. "I know, we're leaving right now." I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he stumbled towards the entrance. The chamber was collapsing around us, the walls crumbling, the ceiling threatening to cave in. We had to get out of here, and fast. We made our way through the tunnels, dodging falling debris, ignoring the groaning and creaking of the station. My father was weak and disoriented, but he followed my lead, trusting me to guide him to safety. As we moved through the tunnels, the images of the past began to fade, the echoes of the horrors disappearing, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. It was as if the station itself was being cleansed, its wounds healing, its soul finally at rest. We reached the upper levels, emerging into the relative order and sanity of the main corridors. The air was fresher here, the light brighter, the atmosphere less oppressive. We found Giant waiting for us in the cafeteria, his face etched with worry. When he saw us, his eyes widened in surprise and relief. "Aris," he exclaimed, "you're alive, and is that your father?" I nodded, smiling weakly. "Yes, Giant," I said, "this is my father. We're going home." Giant rushed forward, helping me support my father's weight. "Let's get out of here," he said. "This place is falling apart." We made our way to the surface, emerging into the blinding white light of the Antarctic landscape. The storm had subsided, the sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly on the endless expanse of snow and ice. Outpost 31 stood behind us, a decaying monument to human ambition and folly, but it no longer held any power over us. We were free. We began to walk, our footsteps crunching in the snow, our faces turned towards the horizon. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew that we would face it together as a family. My father was still weak and disoriented, but he was alive, and he was with me. That was all that mattered. As we walked, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you, Aris," he said, "for saving me, for bringing me home." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes again. "You're welcome, Father," I said. "It's good to have you back." He squeezed my hand tightly, his grip firm and strong. "I'm glad to be back," he said. "I'm glad to be home." And as we walked towards the horizon, hand in hand, I knew that the nightmare was finally over. Chapter 15: The Weight of Silence. The walk back to the rendezvous point, where a rescue team was scheduled to arrive, was arduous. My father, despite the newfound clarity in his eyes, was physically frail after decades of imprisonment and manipulation. Giant, ever the stoic and reliable presence, helped support him, sharing the burden of his weight and offering quiet words of encouragement. The silence was heavy, not the oppressive, malevolent silence of Outpost 31, but a silence born of exhaustion, relief, and the lingering weight of trauma. We had survived, we had escaped, but the horrors we had witnessed, the sacrifices we had made, would forever be etched into our memories. As we walked, I found myself constantly checking on my father, scanning his face for any sign of relapse, any indication that the darkness was attempting to reclaim him. He seemed to sense my anxiety, offering reassuring smiles and gentle squeezes of my hand. "I'm okay, Aris," he'd say, his voice still weak but steady. "I'm really okay. The whispers are gone. I'm finally free." But the fear lingered, a constant companion on our journey. I knew that the scars of his experience would run deep, that the road to recovery would be long and arduous. We reached the rendezvous point just as the rescue team arrived, a small contingent of scientists and military personnel in heavily armored vehicles. They were shocked to see us, especially my father, who had been presumed dead for so long. The journey back to civilization was a blur of medical examinations, debriefings, and bureaucratic red tape. My father was placed under constant medical supervision, his physical and mental health meticulously monitored. I, too, was subjected to countless interviews, pressed for details about what had happened at Outpost 31. I told them everything, omitting nothing, from the initial discoveries to the final confrontation with the Guardian. They listened intently, their faces a mixture of disbelief and horror. When I finished my account, the lead investigator, a stern-faced woman in a military uniform, leaned forward, her eyes piercing. "Dr. Thorne," she said, "you've told us a remarkable story, a story of ancient evils, twisted experiments, and unimaginable horrors. Do you have any proof to support your claims? I hesitated, unsure how to answer. How could I possibly prove what had happened at Outpost 31? The station was in ruins, the evidence destroyed, the victims long dead. I have my father, I said finally. He is living proof of the horrors that transpired there. The investigator nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. We will need to conduct a thorough examination of your father, she said, to determine the extent of his condition. I knew what she meant. They wanted to assess whether my father was truly cured or whether he was still a threat, a potential vessel for the ancient evil. The examination was grueling, both for my father and for me. The doctors subjected him to a battery of tests, probing his mind, analyzing his body, searching for any sign of corruption. I watched helplessly as they poked and prodded him, my heart aching with a mixture of anger and guilt. I had brought him back from the brink of madness, but now I was subjecting him to another form of torment. The results of the examination were inconclusive. My father showed no signs of physical corruption, but his mind was deeply scarred. He suffered from memory loss, nightmares, and periods of intense anxiety. The doctors couldn't say for sure whether he was truly cured or whether the darkness was still lurking beneath the surface. The investigator summoned me to her office, her face grim. "Dr. Thorne," she said, "your father's condition is delicate. He will require extensive therapy and medication. We cannot guarantee that he will ever fully recover." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But he's alive, he's free. That's all that matters." "Perhaps," she said, "but we cannot take any chances. Your father will be placed under constant surveillance. His movements will be monitored, his communications will be tracked. He will never be truly free." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had saved my father from the clutches of an ancient evil, only to imprison him in another kind of darkness. I looked at her, my eyes filled with anger and despair. "You can't do this," I said. "He's done nothing wrong, he's a victim. He deserves to be left alone." "I'm sorry, Dr. Thorne," she said, "but it's necessary. We cannot risk the possibility of another Outpost 31. I knew she was right. They had to protect the world from the horrors I had unleashed, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. As I left her office, I felt the weight of silence pressing down on me again, heavier than ever before. It was the silence of guilt, the silence of regret, the silence of a world that would never truly understand the horrors I had seen. I had saved my father, but at what cost? Had I truly freed him, or had I simply traded one prison for another? The questions haunted me, their answers lost in the silence of the Antarctic ice. Chapter 16: The Haunting of Home. We returned to my childhood home, a small, unassuming house nestled in a quiet, coastal town far removed from the frozen wastes of Antarctica. It was the house I had left behind years ago, driven by my obsession with uncovering the truth about my father's disappearance, a truth I had now faced in its most horrifying form. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The familiar furniture seemed worn and faded, the paint peeling in places, the garden overgrown with weeds. It was as if time had stood still, waiting for our return, but had also allowed the house to slowly decay, mirroring the slow erosion of my family's hope. My father seemed to find some comfort in the familiarity of the house, wandering through the rooms, touching the objects that held memories of a happier past. He would pause before old photographs, his eyes filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow, struggling to piece together the fragmented remnants of his life. "I remember this," he'd say, pointing to a picture of my mother, her face radiant with happiness. "She loved this house. She made it a home." But the house was also haunted, not by ghosts or spirits, but by the echoes of our past, the lingering memories of loss and grief. My mother's absence was palpable, her presence still felt in every room, a constant reminder of the void that had been left in our lives. And there was something else, something more subtle, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. A lingering sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, a whisper of darkness that seemed to cling to the shadows. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a consequence of the trauma I had endured at Outpost 31. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. My father's condition remained fragile. He attended regular therapy sessions, took his medication religiously, and tried to adjust to his new life. But the memories of his imprisonment, the horrors he had witnessed, continued to haunt him. He would often wake up screaming in the night, his body drenched in sweat, his eyes filled with terror. He would speak of whispers, of shadows, of the ancient evil that still lurked in the darkness. "They're still there, Aris," he'd say, his voice trembling. "They're watching us. They're waiting for us to make a mistake." I tried to reassure him, telling him that it was just a nightmare, that the evil was gone, that he was safe now. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I began to notice strange occurrences around the house. Objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing, lights flickering for no apparent reason. I would hear whispers in the dead of night, faint, almost inaudible voices that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I checked the security system, but everything seemed to be in order. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been in the house. I started to suspect that I was losing my mind, that the trauma of Outpost 31 was finally catching up with me. I consulted a therapist, who diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder and prescribed medication. But the strange occurrences continued, growing more frequent and more intense. I found symbols scrawled on the walls, the same sigils I had seen at Outpost 31. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that someone was standing over me, watching me sleep. The house was becoming a prison, a reflection of the horrors I had tried to escape. One night I woke up to find my father standing in my room, his eyes wide and vacant, his body trembling. He was holding a knife in his hand, its blade glinting in the moonlight. "Father," I said, my voice trembling, "what are you doing?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. I don't know," he said. "They told me to do it. They said it was the only way to keep us safe." "Who told you to do it, Father?" I asked, my voice pleading. "Who are they?" He shook his head, his face contorting in agony. "I can't remember," he said, "but they're here. They're always here, watching us, waiting." He raised the knife, his hand trembling. "I have to do it, Aris," he said. "I have to protect you." I knew that he was no longer in control, that the ancient evil had found a way to reclaim him. I had to stop him. I had to save him, even if it meant sacrificing myself. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and I prepared to face the darkness that had followed us home. Chapter 17. The Circle Closes. The moonlight painted stark shadows across my room, illuminating the terror etched on my father's face and the cold glint of the knife in his trembling hand. This was the moment I had dreaded, the moment when the ancient evil, thought vanquished, would rear its ugly head again, claiming my father's soul and perhaps mine as well. "Father, please," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper, "you don't have to do this. You're stronger than them. You can fight them off." His eyes flickered, a brief spark of recognition amidst the encroaching darkness. He strained against some unseen force, his muscles tensing, sweat beading on his forehead. "Aris, I can't," he stammered, his grip tightening on the knife. "They're too strong." I knew I had to act quickly. Reasoning with him was useless. The darkness had too strong a hold. I needed to break its control to reach the man I knew was still trapped within. Thinking fast, I remembered the one thing that had seemed to cut through the corruption at Outpost 31. The book. The leather-bound tome, filled with sigils of power, had been my shield against the ancient evil, a conduit for the cleansing fire. But where was it? In my haste to escape the Antarctic nightmare, I had packed it away, relegated it to a dusty box in the attic. "Father, listen to me," I said, my voice firm despite the fear gripping my heart. "I need your help. There's something in the attic, an old book. It can help us, but I need you to stay strong. Can you do that?" His brow furrowed, his eyes struggling to focus. "The attic," he mumbled. What's in the attic?" "Just stay strong, Father. I'll be right back." I moved slowly, cautiously, trying not to startle him. I reached for the phone on my nightstand and dialed 911, whispering my address and a desperate plea for help. Then I slipped out of the room, leaving my father standing there, frozen in a tableau of torment, the knife still clutched in his hand. The stairs to the attic creaked ominously under my weight, each step echoing through the silent house, amplifying my anxiety. The air grew colder as I ascended, the smell of dust and decay permeating my senses. The attic was a repository of forgotten memories, a treasure trove of relics from our past. Boxes overflowed with old photographs, childhood toys, and moth-eaten clothes. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. I frantically searched through the boxes, tossing aside old clothes and faded photographs, my heart pounding in my chest. Time was running out. The police were on their way, but I needed that book now, before the darkness consumed my father completely. Finally, my fingers brushed against something familiar. The worn leather cover of the book, its sigils faintly glowing in the dim light. Relief washed over me, almost overwhelming me with its intensity. I clutched the book to my chest and raced back down the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps. I reached my room to find my father still standing there, his eyes locked on the knife, his body trembling. But something was different. The moonlight no longer illuminated his face, casting him in shadow. He was no longer visible. A darkness I could barely see, as it was a hole in the air, like something had peeled away from the room. "Father," I said, my voice shaking. The figure shifted, and I knew that he was gone. My dad was a vessel for whatever came for him. And then I saw it. Standing in the doorway, its form shifting and changing, was the Guardian. It was no longer wearing my father's face, but a visage of pure malevolence, a grotesque mask of bone and shadow. It was what lurked behind it. This was his final shape. "You cannot stop me, Aris," it rasped, its voice a chorus of tormented souls. "The ritual is complete. The rebirth will commence." It lunged at me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. I raised the book, chanting the ancient words, calling upon the cleansing fire. The sigils on its cover glowed brightly, bathing the room in an ethereal light. The Guardian recoiled, hissing in pain, but this time it was different. The cleansing fire was not enough. The Guardian was too powerful, its grip on this world too strong. It swatted the book from my hand, sending it flying across the room. It landed with a thud, its sigils dimming, its power waning. I was defenseless. The Guardian closed in, its claws reaching for my throat. Just as I thought all was lost, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. The front door burst open, and a group of police officers stormed into the house, their guns drawn. "Freeze, police!" they shouted. The Guardian turned towards them, its eyes burning with rage. It raised its hands, and the room began to shake. The walls cracked, the ceiling groaned, and the air crackled with energy. The police officers screamed and fell to the ground, clutching their heads. The Guardian was unleashing its power, attempting to destroy everything in its path. But then something unexpected happened. A voice, a familiar voice, rang out through the chaos. "Stop!" it shouted. "Leave him alone." I looked towards the doorway and saw my father standing there, his eyes filled with determination. He was no longer trembling, no longer under the Guardian's control. He was free. He walked towards the Guardian, his body radiating a soft, golden light. "I won't let you hurt him," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I won't let you control me anymore." He reached out his hand and touched the guardian's face. The guardian screamed, a long, agonizing cry that shook the very foundations of the house. Its form began to dissolve, its power fading, its essence dissipating into the air. The shaking stopped. The air grew still. The police officers slowly rose to their feet, their faces filled with confusion and disbelief. The guardian was gone. My father stood there, his body trembling, his face bathed in the moonlight. Then he smiled. "It's over, Aris," he said. "It's finally over." And with that he collapsed into my arms, his body limp and lifeless. He was gone, but he was free. He had finally found peace, sacrificing himself to save me, to save the world. The police officers rushed to my side, their faces filled with concern. "Are you all right, sir?" one of them asked. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm all right, it's over." But deep down, I knew that the haunting would never truly end. The memories of Outpost 31, the horrors I had witnessed, the sacrifices that had been made, would forever be etched into my soul. But I also knew that I had to keep moving forward, to honor the memory of my father, to ensure that his sacrifice was not in vain. I had to tell his story, to warn the world about the dangers that lurked in the shadows, the ancient evils that waited for an opportunity to be unleashed. And perhaps by sharing his story, I could finally find some peace myself. Chapter 18: The Echo of Warning. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Investigations, interviews, and the agonizing process of saying goodbye to my father, a final act of love and respect for the man who had sacrificed everything for me. The police, initially skeptical, were eventually convinced that I was not involved in any wrongdoing. The sheer outlandishness of the events, the monster, the guardian, the cleansing fire, had become undeniable in the face of the evidence. The ruined house, the vanished entity, and the body of my father, a man who had been lost to the world, resurrected from the depths of a nightmare, only to be claimed once more. The media, always eager for a sensational story, latched onto the tale, twisting the facts, sensationalizing the horror. They called it the Antarctic haunting, the story of a son, a father, and a monster from the ice. I avoided the spotlight, retreating into the shadows, desperate to escape the prying eyes and the relentless scrutiny. But I couldn't escape the weight of responsibility. I knew that Outpost 31 was not an isolated incident. It was a warning, a testament to the fragility of our world, the lurking darkness that could consume us all if we weren't vigilant. I decided to write a book, to document everything that had happened, from the initial discoveries at the ice core to the final confrontation in my childhood home. It was a painful process, dredging up the memories, reliving the horrors, but I knew that I had to share my story, to warn the world about the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The book, which I titled Shadows in the Machine, became my legacy, a testament to my father's sacrifice, a warning to humanity. I poured all my grief, my fear, and my determination into its pages. I wrote about the scientific hubris that had unleashed the ancient evil, the moral compromises that had led to its creation, and the desperate fight for survival that had defined our lives. I exposed the truth about Outpost 31, the secret experiments, the hidden tunnels, and the monstrous entity that had claimed so many lives. I described the corruption, the despair, and the ultimate cleansing, the sacrifices we had made to contain the darkness. But I also wrote about hope, about the resilience of the human spirit, about the importance of fighting for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The book was met with a mixture of reactions. Some people dismissed it as a work of fiction, a fanciful tale of monsters and mayhem. Others were intrigued, fascinated by the mysteries I had unveiled. And some, a small but dedicated group, took the book to heart. They saw the truth in my words, recognizing the dangers that threatened our world. They formed a movement dedicated to exposing the truth, to protecting humanity from the forces of darkness. I became an unlikely leader, a reluctant spokesperson for a cause I had never sought. I gave interviews, spoke at conferences, and traveled the world, spreading the word about the horrors of Outpost 31. I warned scientists about the dangers of unchecked experimentation, urging them to consider the ethical implications of their work. I warned governments about the threat of ancient evils, urging them to be vigilant, to prepare for the possibility of a global catastrophe. I knew that my efforts might be in vain, that the darkness might eventually consume us all, but I couldn't stand idly by. I had to do something to fight for a future where humanity could live in peace, free from the shadows of the machine. Years passed. The world changed. New technologies emerged, old problems persisted. The memory of Outpost 31 faded in the public's mind, overshadowed by new crises and new threats. But I never forgot. I never forgot the cold, the darkness, the whispers and the screams. I never forgot the face of my father, the man who had sacrificed everything to save me. I never forgot the responsibility that had been thrust upon me, the burden of warning the world. I continued to write, to speak, to fight. I knew that the battle was not over, that the darkness was always lurking, waiting for its opportunity to strike. And in the quiet moments when the world was still and the shadows grew long, I would hear a whisper, a faint echo of warning, a reminder of the horrors that lay hidden beneath the ice, waiting to be unleashed. The fight continues. The story has just begun. Epilogue: the cycle renewed. The old woman sat by the crackling fireplace, the warmth chasing away the chill that seeped into her bones from the winter wind howling outside. Her hands, gnarled and weathered by time, carefully turned the pages of a worn and dog-eared book. The title, barely legible after years of handling, read shadows in the machine. She had read this book countless times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning, fresh perspectives on the horrors it described. She knew every passage by heart, every chilling detail, every desperate plea. She was Aris Thorne, the unlikely survivor of Outpost 31, the reluctant warrior against the ancient evil. The years had taken their toll, etching wrinkles on her face, silvering her hair, but the fire in her eyes still burned bright, a testament to her unwavering determination. The phone rang, shattering the quietude of the room. Aris hesitated, her hand hovering over the receiver. She knew who it was. She had been expecting this call for years. She took a deep breath and answered the phone. "Thorne," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "Dr. Thorne," a young, nervous voice replied on the other end. "It's Dr. Anya Petrova from the Russian Antarctic Research Station, Vostok." Aris's heart skipped a beat. Vostok, the largest subglacial lake in Antarctica, buried beneath miles of ice. The site of numerous unexplained phenomena, the focus of intense scientific scrutiny, and, as Aris suspected, the new focus of the ancient evil. "Dr. Petrova," Aris said, her voice growing colder, "what's happening?" We've detected something unusual," Anya said, her voice trembling. "An energy signature. It's similar to the one described in your book, the one from Outpost 31. Aris closed her eyes, her mind racing. It was happening again. The cycle was renewing. The darkness was stirring. "Tell me everything," Aris said, her voice commanding. "What have you found?" Anya hesitated for a moment, then launched into a detailed description of the anomalies they had detected. The energy signature, the strange seismic activity, the unexplained disappearances of personnel. It was all eerily familiar, a chilling echo of the events that had unfolded at Outpost 31. As Anya spoke, Aris knew what she had to do. She had to return to Antarctica to confront the darkness once more, to prevent another catastrophe from unfolding. She was old, her body frail, her spirit weary, but she was not afraid. She had faced the worst horrors imaginable and she had survived. She knew what was at stake. "I'm coming," Aris said, interrupting Anya. "Prepare for my arrival. I'll bring everything I need." Anya hesitated, her voice laced with disbelief. "Dr. Thorne, with all due respect, you're not exactly suited for an expedition to Antarctica. It's a harsh environment, even for the most seasoned researchers." Aris chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Suitability is irrelevant, Dr. Petrova. I'm the only one who understands what you're facing. I'm the only one who can help you contain it." Anya sighed. "I understand, Dr. Thorne, but it's still incredibly dangerous. Are you sure you're up for this?" "More than sure," Aris said, her voice resolute. "This is my responsibility. I can't let another Outpost 31 happen, not on my watch." She hung up the phone, her hands trembling slightly. She knew this journey would be her last. She was old, her body failing, and the darkness she was about to face was more powerful than ever before. But she had to try. She had to fight. For her father, for Lena, for all those who had perished at Outpost 31, and for the future of humanity. She rose from her chair, her joints creaking in protest. She walked to a locked cabinet, her hand trembling as she fumbled with the key. Inside the cabinet, carefully preserved, were the relics of her past, the leather-bound book, the compass, the map of Outpost 31. She reached for the book, its worn leather cover familiar to her touch. The sigils on its surface glowed faintly, sensing the impending danger. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. The cycle was renewing, but she was ready. She opened her eyes, her gaze unwavering. She packed her bags, gathering the tools she would need for the journey ahead. She knew that she was walking into the darkness, but she was not afraid. She was Aris Thorne, the survivor of Outpost 31, the warrior against the ancient evil. And she would not rest until the darkness was vanquished, once and for all. She stepped out of the house into the cold winter night. The wind howled around her, carrying whispers of the past, echoes of the future. She looked up at the stars, their light twinkling in the vast expanse of the universe. She felt a sense of peace, a sense of acceptance. She was going home. And this time she would not be alone. The ghosts of the past would be with her, guiding her, protecting her. She smiled, a small, determined smile. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. The cycle had begun again, but this time it would end. The echo of warning had been heeded, the battle was joined, and the future of humanity hung in the balance. The end or a new beginning.